Hot Fan Media, and today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the valve cover gaskets or the valve cover on this 02 Toyota Tacoma. Let's get to it. Okay, so I want to quickly preface that this is a difficult job. It is not a beginner sort of job. There really aren't any other videos on the internet at the moment that go through every step of the process, which is what I'm going to be doing for you today. So it's going to be a very lengthy video. Quick backstory on this one is that I've already done this before, but when I put everything back together, the valve cover cracked. So got to put a new valve cover on. I've already done all the valve cover gaskets, so I won't be taking off the valve cover that isn't broken, but I will go through the process on the driver's side and show you all that. So hopefully you'll get all the information that you need to do this job yourself. This video is going to be split into parts with timestamps. First, we're going to take off the air hose, then we're going to take off the top plenum, then we're going to take off the bottom plenum. The fourth part is going to be taking the passenger side valve cover off, which I will not actually be taking it off, but I will walk you through the steps. The fifth part is going to be taking the driver's side valve cover off, and then I will go through all those 5 steps in reverse to put everything back on. I'm going to go through a couple of the tools and supplies you're going to be needing for this job. First of all, gloves, of course. These are really nice, not really in the summertime because they are lined, but I recommend something like this and not something like the rubber gloves because they're going to get really torn up in this project. So if you have something like this, that's going to be best. I'm going to be using this Makita drill for most of the removal of the bolts, not much of the putting back in of the bolts because you could strip if you use a power tool, but I'm going to be using this to remove things. You are definitely going to need pliers, all kinds of different pliers. I've got some curved pliers, needle nose, and whatever these are called, it escapes me at the moment. You are going to need a wrench, and you're definitely going to need some extensions for that wrench. This is what I'm mostly going to be using to put the bolts back on. You're definitely going to need screwdrivers, and I've got a bunch of screwdrivers right here. You're going to need gasket material. This is Ultra Black Permatex Gasket Maker. It's kind of inexpensive, but this job is not a very cheap job to begin with, so you want to get good gasket maker, and I do recommend this brand. You're going to need flashlights. I like to use something a little bigger like these because I can put them in tight spots, but not everybody has these. You're probably not going to have these, but you do need adequate lighting, so flashlights are good to have around. You're going to need shop rags, of course, and you are going to need brake parts cleaner. I recommend brake parts cleaner and not water. Water is not going to be very useful to you for this project. I recommend cleaning everything down before and after you've gotten your valve cover gaskets or new valve cover in, and chances are if you're having a leak, you've got a mess. And with a truck as old as this, if it's never been done before, I recommend you go ahead and grab at least 4 cans of it because it takes a lot of it to clean this project up. So yeah, you're gonna need some of this for sure. The only tool I'm gonna be using for this job that chances are you don't have is this topside creeper. They're pretty expensive, but if you do shop jobs on a pretty often basis, they're good to have. When you lean up against this thing, it's got plastic snaps in it, and I've broken at least one plastic snap leaning up against it. So if you're gonna be doing this job without the topside creeper, I do recommend that you keep that in mind, that this kind of is not very well made. And without any more jabbering, I'm just going to go ahead and start getting into this project. Okay, first thing we're going to do is take the positive battery cable off. You can do positive or negative, but I'm going to do positive. And this is a 13mm ratchet wrench. Wiggle it off. And you just want to get that off, push it down to the side. You definitely don't want it ever coming up and touching this while you're doing your job. So if you're a little bit concerned about it, or yours doesn't lay down as easily as mine did, you can just put a little rag over the battery terminal. First thing we're going to do is remove this. This has 3 bolts, one here, and it has a bolt right here, and then it has 2 bolts over here, and this little pin right here. All of these things are going to go in the same place. And what I did last time was I got different colored rags to color code which bolts went to what pieces. And that's very important because they're all kind of a little different and you really don't want to mix these things up. So I'm going to go ahead and take those bolts off. 10 millimeter. So try to go slow and careful. Now this bolt, it has a nut and washer on the other side. So when you loosen this, you want to keep your hand underneath that to make sure that it doesn't drop. You want to be really careful because you don't want to lose it. Okay, now I'm going to take these out. Okay, now that we've got the bolts and the pin removed, we're just going to slide this off. Turn it around like this and lay it down. And that gets it completely out of your way. Next, we're going to be removing this piece. All that needs to come out. And the first thing we're going to do is unclip this clip right here. This right here is the cabin air filter. And this is the first clip we're going to be taking off. You're going to push your finger in on that right there. Wiggle and lift up. And there it goes. You're going to want to get a pair of pliers and pinch it and push it out of that right there. And then along this hose line, these just pull straight out. There we go. You're just going to want to try to lay this out of the way as best as possible. I kind of wrapped mine around this post right here. Okay, next you're going to want to take all of these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. They are 10 millimeter and you want to loosen them. Mine, probably tell already, are loosened. The first thing you want to take out is this right here. You just want to wiggle this back and forth, pop it out. There we go. You want to be kind of gentle. This has a little holder right here. You can just pull it out of its holder and lay it aside. Okay, something happened to my recording and mine came off without being videoed, but you want to twist as much this way when it's stuck on that one, and when you've got it off of that one, you want to keep twisting it this way to get this piece out of the way of all that in there, and it'll come off pretty easily. And when you do get it off, just go ahead and give yourself a round of applause because this is one of the hardest parts of the whole job. Okay, now this goes to the box. Just gonna stand it up in the corner here. And then I'm gonna slip that beneath it. That is the first stage of the whole process done. Got all your bolts here for it. And congratulations, you've completed part 1. Okay, now we're moving on to part 2, which is taking the top plenum off. First thing I'm going to do is start detaching things that attach directly to it, and that would be one of these clips. Oh, there it is. Okay, just kind of gotta tuck that in right there. I'm also going to detach this wire right here. All this has to come off. These are already loose. I didn't tighten them up very tight because I was just testing. You're going to need a set of these to loosen them up. Okay, so we've got a 12 and a 14 millimeter. Now we're going to take these out. It runs down into here and you just pull that up and slide it out like that. And then the second one is right here. And you're going to want to remove that from its holder right here and then slide it out and around and wiggle it out. Okay, you might want to pull it out of this holder real quick. Loosen that up a little bit so we get a little more room. It would probably be very helpful if you had a screwdriver in on the other side pushing it out. There we go. And then this is attached down here and you just want to kind of get it out of the way. Next one that's easiest to get to looks like this one. And that one, we're going to need our pliers for that. I'm going to grab this with my pliers and just kind of push it back until it's loose. Just rock it back and forth. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of lay that down out of the way a little bit. Next one is this one. Get my pliers behind it. Push it back. Okay, now I've got this one that comes through there. I'm going to take that out. It's got a little plastic holder. I'm just going to snap that off so that I can pull this out of the way a little bit better. I'm gonna put that underneath it. So now I've got all those hoses and wires pulled off to the side. And that is all the hoses for the top plenum. Now we're gonna be taking the bolts out. This one, this one, this one, and there's one back here. All the bolts are 12 millimeter. Okay, so now on the top of the plenum, there's one right here and one right there. Okay, so now I'm gonna put all the top plenum bolts on this red rag. We've got the 2 nuts, the 2 short bolts, and then these 2 long bolts. Okay, now I'm just gonna put a hand underneath that intake and get a hand kind of underneath it and lift up gently. Looks like I've still got some things attached to it, but what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna take the plenum gasket off because these can break kind of easily. They're metal, which is very interesting, but they have a plastic liner on them. I mean, not plastic, a painted sort of black liner on them, so you want to be careful that none of that chips and gets into your plenum or anything like that. So I'm gonna go set this aside. Okay, and now I've got a series of hoses that are attached to this, but they're mostly underneath. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna detach this one first, just wiggle it off, and then that will leave this mostly free. And then I'm gonna lift this up, and you can see that there's 3 hoses. So with this lifted up, it's gonna be easier for me to get those hoses off. So here are our hoses. This one was the one that we took off first, and it kind of rotates a little bit. When you put it back on, you wanna make sure that this is not underneath your plenum like that. We'll go through that when we put it back on. So we got this one right here. That one's the easiest to get off, and then that one right there. These 2 are kind of difficult to get to with the pliers, and I won't get a close-up on that because I definitely can't do that one-handed, but you just get your pliers behind it like you would all the other ones, pull them back, and then pull these off. Okay, now you've got your top plenum completely removed, and we're gonna take this over to our other parts. Okay, I'm gonna put the plenum down on the ground beside this box. Second part is done, getting the top plenum off. Give yourself a round of applause. Okay, now we're moving into the third part, which is the bottom plenum. I'm gonna work on everything that's just right here first. We've got this bolt, this hose, which I'm just gonna go ahead and take out right now. Okay, so there we go. There are 2 bolts, one right here, one right here. There's a bolt right down in here, kind of hard to get to. And then of course there's one on the other side, down in there. And then there are a few things on the side, but we'll get to that once we finish with this first. Oh, don't take these out. Don't take this one or that one out. There's no need for it. I actually did that the first time around, and there's just, you don't need to do that. 12 millimeter bolt. This is a great big long one. Got the ones on the back here, also 12 millimeter. And then these down here, you're probably gonna have to use an extension, but I don't quite need one. Got that one mostly loosened, but you're gonna wanna do the rest by hand because it's easy to drop. Then I'm gonna go on to the other side. There it is. So now that is all the bolts for the bottom plenum. I've got my second box over here right next to the top plenum. I'm gonna put all my bolts into this styrofoam cup right here. And the valve cover bolts will go into this area. So you do one and you put all the parts here, and then you put all that back together. Then you take the other side off, put all the parts here, and then put those back together. Okay, so there are 2 things keeping the bottom plenum attached to the vehicle. The first one is this bolt right here. It's at 10 millimeter. And the second one is this hose right there. Gonna have to get your pliers behind that, squeeze, pull down, just like everything else. Okay, there is a 10 millimeter bolt, but it's a little difficult to get to because of this hose in the way. So I'm going to switch to this little ratchet because it can get in a little bit tighter. It does have one other hose attached to it. This one right there. There's my finger right there. Okay, I'm gonna switch off to my 10mm ratchet, okay? And I'm going to go set that with my other bolts. Alrighty, and then I'm gonna get down to this hose down here. Here we go. Okay. Our last little bolt. Gonna get my wrench on it. Try to anyway. It's hard to get it down in there, but yeah, I gotta do that two-handed. But anyway, that's the bolt you're gonna get out, 10mm. Just gonna get that, wiggle it out. Okay, yep, I need two hands, but that's the one. Get that one out. Okay, everything is detached for real now, and we can actually lift this off. Now I'm going to very carefully remove the bottom plenum gasket. And you do kind of have to lift both sides at once. And you don't want any pieces dropping down in there. Now the very next thing you have to do is take clean towels and put it over the holes. I'm just gonna stick that in the hole right there. Go to the next hole, push it in a little bit. Next hole, push it in a little bit. And then I gotta get another rag, do the same thing, and then finish off with the final hole. You're gonna have big problems if anything drops into those holes, so you wanna get them as covered, and you want to kind of avoid this whole area as much as possible. Okay, so now we've got the bottom plenum removed. There's all of our bolts for it, and give yourself a big congratulations because you have completed step 3 of the 10-step not beginner process. Okay, I am not going to be taking this passenger side off like I mentioned, but I am going to be going through the steps that it will take for you to take them off. First thing is these come out of their little plastic holders. You kind of have to push them down and then pop them out. You have to unplug them, so you have to unplug this, this, and this. Then you undo these bolts and they pull out. This one pulled right out, but these two took me at least 20 minutes to get them pulled out. So I don't know if that's for everybody, but if you have a little bit of trouble, it's okay. Somebody's been through it before. Just try not to stick any tools down in there. Just use your fingers as much as you can and you'll be all right. Then we have a bolt right here. We have 2 bolts right here, a bolt right there. And this is where it gets a little trickier. 2 bolts right here, 1, 2. And those hold this plastic guard in, holding the wires in so that the wires don't get everywhere and so they're straight. But the bottom side of this crumbled to pieces, and it's really important that none of those pieces get inside the valve cover. You probably will drop a piece or two, but just try to keep track of the pieces. Make sure you pick them out if they get in there. You're probably going to have to take at least one of these out. The snap releases on it broke when I took it out, so you know, it literally just pulls out now. And because of that, I got a little paranoid and I did not snap these out. So these still have the snaps on and they don't come out very easily, but this one does because it's broken. But just do whatever you gotta do to get it loose. They break, it's just part of life. It's gonna be okay because of the way that the plenum sits on top of it. They're not gonna get loose. This has to be pulled out, and I did unsnap this one because it was attached to this black piece, but because it broke, you probably wouldn't have to a second time. It just kind of all loosens it up. When I put everything back together, this one actually got away from me because of the way this plastic hangs over, and I couldn't find it, and the car didn't start up correctly. But my dad came out here and he helped me find this wire that I missed. So if you do unplug that one, just keep an eye on it. It'll get away from you. To actually remove the valve cover, you are gonna have to take this dipstick out. You just push that metal piece out and pull this up. When I took it out, I did not unhook any of this. I'm sure there's a way to, but I just didn't find it necessary. There's a good amount of space in here and you can pretty easily get it in and out, but there is some finagling that you have to do because of this right here and that right there. But if you're careful and you move slowly, you're gonna be totally fine. Okay, so this is the valve cover I'm gonna be replacing, and that down there is the crack. So there's this bolt here, we've got 1 bolt here, 1 bolt there. This bolt I took out and forgot to replace because it really doesn't go into anything, but I will be replacing it. That's the other one. It holds this into place, which actually hasn't broken yet, which is astonishing. And you're going to have to undo that to get to the bolts back here. And once I get those bolts out, we'll move on from there. Alrighty, I have got a 10mm bolt with an extension on it, and I'm going to do this one in the corner with the crack first. Okay, you want to keep an eye on the washers that are below the bolts. They won't come off with the bolt, but they will fall off. They will kind of get away from you, so it's good to have some metal and rubber washers on hand just in case you lose something. Okay, so I did this corner first. If you want to keep your valve cover intact, it's best to go in a series. So you go corner to corner, corner to corner, and then diagonally, 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 diagonally. So I'm gonna go to the other corner. There it is. Okay. I'm gonna get this bolt that holds the plastic piece out next. Okay, and make sure you get the little piece that goes on the back of it. This is probably the most difficult valve cover out of the two because of the way this plastic piece sits. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull these out. There's one, there's two. On the other side, they are labeled. So in order from closest to the vehicle to closest to where you would be, they are 5, 3, 1, and they should have labels on the wires. These do not, and I'm just going to put those off to the side. And then I'm going to rock this up and kind of pull this up and out of the way a little bit. And then that came unplugged right there because the little snap broke. That one's unplugged. And I did not unplug the last one because again, I was kind of worried about the braking. I don't really know if you should be or not, but it did crank fine. And they did sit down snugly fine. So if it's getting to be too much for you, I wouldn't worry about it a whole lot. Okay, now I'm going to take this one off and then go straight diagonally to its match, which that one is actually the hardest one to get to. Kind of have to finagle a little bit because the hose is in the way. Okay, now I'm going to do this one, and then I'm going to go diagonally across and do that one, and then I'm going to do that one, and then the very last one. Okay, these are going to go into the box. These were some of the other valve cover bolts, and then that's the bolt that goes to the plastic thing that's completely useless. So that's where those go. The only other thing that's attached to the valve cover is this hose right here. You just gotta wiggle that hose off. And then I suggest you put it with the other valve cover bolts and such. So there is nothing attached to the valve cover now, and we're just going to kind of get our hands on it and pull it up any way you can. Looks like the new gasket worked pretty well. Okay, it's loose now, but we've got plenty of things that are really in the way. What's got to happen to this is it's kind of got to go tilt up, go down, and then pull out at an angle to the side. You really do want to be just as careful as you can be. Slide the plastic thing over it as best I can. There we go. Okay, that's half the battle. Oh, there it went. Now here's the bit of the angled part where it's coming out. Okay. Okay, here we go, here we go, here we go. There it is. Now you can probably tell once you've done yours that this does not look like yours because I spent a solid 30 minutes to an hour cleaning these out, which it won't even matter now because this is going to get replaced. But because I put on a valve cover gasket maker on the corners, the valve cover gasket actually stayed on the engine block, which is actually probably a very good sign that my gasket maker was a good one. Okay, so here's our valve cover gasket, and I will actually go through the process of putting this back on so you know how to put your gasket on if you're not just replacing the valve cover. So let's go over there and do that. So here's our gasket, and you can see the gasket maker that I put on. So you're only going to put this in once you've got it all clean, and you want to clean the most in this channel, and then definitely, of course, around in here. You really don't want anything that can be loose in here. And I recommend you clean it with brake parts cleaner instead of water, because water is just not going to work very well, and it will not dry quickly. So if you're wanting to get back on the road quickly, you want to use something that evaporates, and that will be brake parts cleaner. I also recommend that you do this job before an oil change, because anything that drops into that compartment will pretty much get flushed out when you do an oil change, or at least that's my theory, because I've held off on the oil change just in case anything nasty is in there. These are pretty hard to get out if the vehicle has never had this done before, because they're plastic and they break all over the place. You really don't want to get any of this scraped really badly. What breaks normally is this ring right here, so that ring will kind of be gone, and you'll be able to get your tool kind of underneath that, and it is going to scrape a little bit, but that's really the only way to get it out. And when you get it back in, you just slide it in underneath this, and you take a rubber mallet and just carefully pound it in. And the reason why I'm explaining all that is because the new valve cover came in with all of that on. Here's the new valve cover, and it came with a gasket and whatever these are called already installed, and I didn't want to take any of that apart to show you. What we're gonna do is we've got to clean the edges off of any gasket material, but what you do not want to do is clean the inside of it. Just leave it alone. The spaces where we want to clean the most are where the humps are, where they make a little corner. So those two right there, and then those two right there. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and clean that down really good, and then what we'll do is the gasket material goes in those corners, and then I put a little dot just other places I think, you know, it could use it. Probably a little excessive, so just, you know, do whatever you want, but mostly you want the gasket material in those corners because there are no bolts right there, and that could be a spot where it could leak. So, yep, gonna go ahead and get started on that. I'm gonna spray a little bit of brake parts cleaner on this rag. Now I'm going to get my gasket material out and start putting it in those corners with the half circle. So I'm just gonna squeeze this little bit out onto my finger and then put it on. Stick it in that corner. Once you put the gasket material on, you have to work kind of quickly. Okay, so we have our valve cover, and this is what we want facing towards the outside of the vehicle. And I'm going to put it in at this angle. I slide it in there. And you just want to be gentle and slow with it. Okay, so this is pretty unfortunate, but the video cut out, but I'm sure you get the idea. When you put the valve cover in, you go at an angle in towards the vehicle as far as you can, and then get it over this plastic thing and push it down. So now I'm just going to free anything that might be holding it up. I got one of these hoses hooked. There it goes. And now I'm just going to slide it on the those things in the middle. And you're actually going to want to get a rubber mallet out and kind of tap down on those holes because you want it to be sitting down flush with the engine block as possible, but you know, try to be as gentle as possible. Okay, yeah, that's pretty flush, and the reason you want to do that is to help the bolts going in to not crack. Now I'm going to grab my wrench, my handheld wrench, Okay, so I just put the rubber and metal washers on the nuts. I'm just going to slide that down in there. And then I'm gonna hand tighten it because you really do wanna be careful that you're not cross-threading. Once I know that it's in, I'm just gonna go ahead and tighten this with my wrench. Something that I noticed about this particular job is that these nuts won't torque to spec, which, you know, is pretty important. They really do just spin and keep spinning and kind of squish out the rubber washer. What I did the first time around was I just kind of kept in mind how much I was tightening each one, and then I left it at that, and it did quite all right for the other side, and it would have done probably just fine if the valve cover hadn't, you know, cracked. So that is what I'm gonna do this time. Tightening this down lifted this up, so looks like I've got to put this screw in next before I tighten down. So I'm going completely opposite. Instead of on the left, I'm going to the right, and instead of on the bottom, I'm going to the top. And you want to do that because it gets an even amount of pressure between the two bolts so that you're tightening it down almost as if you were tightening all of them down at the same time. That's kind of how that pressure creates it. I'm gonna snug that one and then tighten this one. And I'll do a final tighten on all of them when I've got all of them in. So now I'm going to go to top left. I'm gonna go to bottom right, and this is the most difficult one to put in. Now I'm going to do this one right here. Just snug it up a little bit. And then I'm going to go to the opposite one. I'm sure you guys get it by now. I'm just doing the opposite all the way around, and that's how I'm going to tighten them too. I'm just kind of running my fingers along the line, and it is nice and snug. And then I'm gonna take the cap that was on the old valve cover, just go ahead and stick that on the new one. I'm just gonna push these wires back in and kind of get all that back in place to prepare for doing all the steps in reverse. So you have now officially finished the step 5, which is the last step of the taking it all apart. Now we're gonna go in reverse and put all of it back on. Okie dokie, so now we're going to start putting it all back together. And I'm gonna start by pulling these over and sticking them back in. I'm gonna leave this one out because it hooks onto the plenum. So I'm actually gonna just kind of put that one to the side right there. Okay, you're gonna wanna put that third one in before you tighten everything down, but it clips on this little holder right here. So you kind of don't wanna put it in all the way before you put the plenum on, and you don't want to screw the plenum on down before you put that in because it's pretty difficult to get in when this isn't movable. So yeah, pro tip. And that one goes in, and this one goes in. I'm just gonna push them down. And the next thing I want to do is take this hose that we took off and set aside and go ahead and attach that back to its little spout right there. And then I'm going to put these bolts back in that go right here and right there. And then I'm going to take these rags off, put the bottom plenum on, and then we are going to go through putting all those bolts and hoses back on. I'm gonna stick the gasket on first. And I'm just gonna kind of set it there and then get on my creeper. This is pretty finicky, so you just want to be slow. Oh no, I just have it turned the wrong way around. That's it. Okay. Slow and easy. I want to make sure nothing's sitting in the way so that it drops all the way down. And then first thing I'm gonna do is just attach that little hose back on. There we go. And then I'm gonna go get my bolts. I'm gonna do my first bolt, the big long one, goes right down in the middle. And then I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that up to where it's just snug, because I'm gonna get a torque wrench on all of those. Next, I want to put the nuts on the sides here, and they're really easy to drop at this stage, so just try to be careful and precise with them. And I try to hand tighten all my bolts just to make sure that they're not getting cross-threaded. Snug it down a little bit, and then I'm gonna do the other one. Then I'm gonna do these little star ones that go on the back end of it. Okay, all of those were 12 millimeters, but I gotta switch over to a 10 millimeter now for the little bolt that holds the plastic piece to the plenum. This one is kind of difficult to get on because you have to hold the plastic piece up a little bit. Now I'm going to take my torque wrench. It is set to 10 pounds of torque. Actually, I kind of changed my mind. I'm going to put it down to 5 pounds. I felt like it was just a little too tight last time. I'm just going to snug up all these bolts. And now we're going to put the bolt for this little wire thing back on. Okay, this is a 10 millimeter bolt, and I'm just going to snug it up a little bit. Doesn't need to be too tight, and it definitely doesn't need to be torqued. Okay, this little curvy snake thing right here goes on to that one. This one goes on to there. And then this one right here goes back onto that. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put all these metal twist tie things back on with 2 hands. Alrighty, so once you've got all your hoses and your bolts tightened down, I'm going to put the top plenum gasket back on, and then I'm going to put the plenum itself on. This hose, like I said before, you want to make sure that it's out of the underneath of that. And it's easier to do when you're from the top angle, but I'm here now. Okay, there we go. First thing I want to do is reconnect this hose right here because it can kind of get in the way. Done right there. Oh, darn, I forgot. Okay, I'm going to lift this back up. And it's much easier to put the hoses that go on the bottom side on when it's right side up. I'm going to connect the hoses to these 3 openings right here now. So I'm gonna do the middle one first, and it does not have a metal clamp. So I'm just gonna squeeze it in there. Then I'm gonna do this one on the left side. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the left side. No, that's the right side. Now I'm gonna do the right side. And then I'm going to get my pliers, tighten those up. Then I'm gonna lay it down. 1 long bolt goes here, 1 long bolt goes here. Give those a little hand tighten. Then I'm gonna move to my wrench. Okay, I really am just having all the technical problems today, but I've reattached everything, and I'm gonna go through and touch everything that I reattached. This thing right here, this hose right here, this hose right here, these go back on. You gotta stick them in their little holes and then pull them back. So both of those went on. I put them in their holders, snap these little things on, and of course all the nuts went in. So this one and this one, whoop, get in there, that one. The 2 nuts, this one and that one, and then these 2 bolts right here. So all that went down. They were torqued down to 5 foot-pounds, and then the hoses went on. And now we're coming to the last steps of this project, which is putting the air hose back on. Whoa, hold up. Why do I have bolts and a hose? What do these go to? Pretty sure that goes in there. Okay, there it goes. And then the little plastic thing clips onto that. Okay. Okay, so when you put your air intake hose back on, you want to put it on this first. Okay, there it is. And then this is the hardest part. It's pretty difficult. Okay, I need the other glove. Almost there. Okay, come on. There it is. Come on. Come on. Come on.
It's not going where you want it to go?
It's just like really hard. Okay, there it is. Oh no. It is giving me a hard time. Okay. Just wiggle, please, wiggle. Okay, there it goes. There it is. Woo, that one fought me. Okay, now this goes back on there. This little hose right here goes back on that. These little metal rings have a 10mm bolt on them to tighten them up. And you really don't want to tighten them too tight, just snug. And then there's one last one. Let me see if I can get it to come around. Okay. Okay, so much excitement. We are in the home stretch now. And what I'm gonna do, because I have the little thing in my hand, is go ahead and turn that around and line all that up. And then I'm gonna go get my bolts, 10mm, and then I'm gonna line this up, and I'm gonna put these in first because it's easier to put the one with the nut in when it's stable. Okay, and then I'm gonna take the nut off of this and go ahead and put that on, which is kind of difficult. You gotta be really careful not to drop it. Now I'm just gonna hold that nut pretty tight. Whoa, what? Oh, wow, I didn't have it in the thing. That's nice. So maybe getting your eyeballs on it and looking around to make sure you got it in the hole. That's probably a good idea. Okay, now I'm gonna do that all over again. Gotta get this one on. Now we have 2 bolts left. Those are gonna go right in here. Line that up, stick my bolts in. Because this is a plastic piece, you do not want to get these super snug. It'll be just fine if you just get it fairly tightened. Then this little piece slides right over that. And my cotter pin broke, so I had to get a new one. I'm just gonna slide that right in there. There we go. That goes on this thing right here. So what you're gonna wanna do before you start patting yourself on the back is checking all your little hoses and connections and bolts. But if you're lucky, then you are all done. And that is so exciting. And that is it. To test your new valve cover or valve cover gaskets, you're going to want to crank the car and let it run for at least 30 minutes. You're looking for any sort of active little drip or seeping. If you did any sort of cleaning with brake parts cleaner or any kind of solvent on the engine, that is gonna burn off and smoke. So don't get too overexcited yet. It's probably just burning off that cleaner, and it'll go away in about 30 minutes, and that's when you'll really start to see what's going on with your new parts. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you have any questions about this repair, I will do my best to answer those in the comments below. I'm not really an expert, so sometimes I just kind of have to say, this is what happened to me, and that's all I know. But I really do appreciate y'all's feedback. It surprises me every time. If you want to see more of this content, you can subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the garage. I know there's things I'm supposed to be saying like and subscribe, but I feel like throwing up every time I say that. So, like and subscribe if you want to. That's it. I'm done. I'm out.